We're now at stage 4 of 5 stages that we've identified from the beginning to the end of the pandemic. The first 3 stages were essentially as we were all finding our way into quick downsizing, expense management, cash flow management, and essentially shutting down the entire economy. It's now time to get underway with what happens next. What do we do? So let's take a look at what we think is happening. In the hotel sector, we've seen the sharpest decline in RevPAR ever. We are having projections that show plummeting demand in 2020 with a very sharp increase in 2021. That's the world that we are currently in. But will business actually be the same? So businesses have become accustomed to having all sorts of tools available at their disposal to congregate online, and we know all of the different devices that are available. It's been highly competitive, and everyone has chosen their vehicle of choice to communicate with one another. Bottom line is home-based work has become a fixture, and how that's going to play out in terms of organization structure, rules governing that is yet to be determined. But go on the premise that indeed some organizations will say, well, do we really need to have the office space that we had before? And there's a good possibility the answer will be no. And if we've seen commercial space vacancy rates lower, we'll probably discover they're higher. And at which point in time, what is going to be done with that commercial space? It may very well turn into something that's competitive for hotels. We know that international travel, while borders are still secure, will be slow to start. And even when it does come back, at what rate and how robust will it be? That in turn also sees a reduction in business travel. Again, that we've got all these other vehicles available for communicating. The SMERF sector itself is dependent very much on basically what the consumer is all about, and they are going to have less money. And of course, leisure. We've got the highest recorded unemployment rates in the history of Canada, and is there going to be a lot of leisure travel in the meantime? So with this backdrop of revenues that are going to grow likely at a gradual rate over the coming months and possibly increasing at a more rapid rate sometime in 2021, what do we do? Well, we argue that the general manager position is probably the most vital position as it relates to a hotel, and it should be amplified at this point in time. That person, he or she, knows their marketplace. They know exactly what they have to be doing in terms of trying to penetrate that marketplace and be competitive, and probably will be the best in terms of equipping what will be done over the next 24 months. But that general manager is not necessarily going to be nothing more than somebody who looked after a hotel in a traditional way. That general manager is now going to actually start behaving like an entrepreneur, and in effect, looking at the business almost as a startup business. If that mindset is there, then at that point in time, there's a good chance that the solutions that have to be constructed organizationally will be constructed for the coming months and frankly for the next couple of years. Certainly, that general manager must know employment laws. And the reason for that is there's a greater vulnerability where employees are going to want to exercise their rights as they discover that they don't necessarily have income. As an example, if an employee is in fact going to be terminated permanently and they do not consider that they have received adequate compensation, that might find its way into a potential either into the law courts or alternatively in front of the Employment Standards Branch of the Ministry of Labor. Another consideration for that general manager is looking at the background of that GM. Most came up one of the particular streams in the industry, And it may very well be that in order for them to be able to operate the business, that they actually take the responsibility for one operational stream of their business as well. But then who does come back first? So if you accept that we are in effect looking at a startup operation, it's not just merely, well, we laid all these people off and now we're going to return them back to what was the case before. That's not going to happen. And anybody who is trying to project that kind of an image, I think, is going to do some serious damage to shareholders. Certainly the people who are going to contribute to revenue growth, understanding the market, looking how to penetrate that market so that against the competition you're more successful. That particular group of individuals you really want to get on side fairly quickly. There's probably a couple of executives involved there. And then of course the direct labor component, which essentially is going to occur when you indeed have some revenue. So if you have no rooms occupied, you won't have any room attendants, but if you have rooms occupied, you may indeed have room attendants. But even there, it could very well be a housekeeping supervisor in a non-union setting that's doing the work rather than the normal room attendant. This does involve some very crucial decision making, and this is where it becomes very difficult. As I have talked about before, these are individuals that we are talking about. These are individual employees who have their needs, their wants, their expectations that we in fact are going to have to be managing, whether it's good or whether it's bad. So at a macro level, here's some simple thoughts. Take a look at your inventory of human assets. I'm suggesting that you take a look at the resumes as well. You may discover that there's some skill sets that people got that you didn't know they had. That may indeed suggest that they can take a dual portfolio as an example. And you certainly want to look at those people who have got the best performance, that they are the ones who are going to be the drivers going forward, and those who in fact have not met the standards or have been nothing more than marginal, you may not want to bring them back. But you need to understand, well, what is the work that we need to have done? Because that work will then define what jobs you have to construct in order to take a look at your number one item, which is the people that we have got. And in fact, you may discover that you can match the two. And you might want to have somebody else come in that's got a dual portfolio that they can manage, because you do not have somebody who has the skill sets that can do actually two particular portfolios. You want to, as I mentioned, remember the individual conversations. Understand what the human responses are going to be. And of course, with that, at the macro level, you want to understand what are the, in fact, the termination costs, and in fact, possibly the salary increases that you might have to consider. If a person, in fact, has expanded work to be done, they may very well expect that they should be compensated accordingly. Certainly less than what you would have to pay if you had two people, as an example, doing the work. So here's some illustrations of modified job descriptions. In fact, some of these things may already be occurring. Have room attendants performing some maintenance work, replacing light bulbs, battery replacement and remotes, checklist that all is working in the rooms. In other words, they're actually going through the room to see if in fact everything is operational, much of what maintenance has done in the past. You may want to have the creation of lead hands that might appear in a bargaining unit rather than having frontline supervisors, because a lead hand is in fact a working supervisor. It's that housekeeping supervisor in the bargaining unit that actually can clean rooms as well. Talked about the issue of having executives taking a look at who it is that you want to bring back, while certainly trying to have them combine two departments under the aegis of one particular manager. And the larger hotels, the senior level jobs, again, you might want to reevaluate them and see whether in fact you can do some job combinations there as well. But as mentioned, the rates of pay will have to be reviewed in all cases. Your financial contingencies, certainly the cost of permanent layoffs. You may very well want to take a look at your benefits and recalibrate that. You may want to consider that there has to be some better cost sharing between employees and employer, or perhaps the benefits are too rich that you can't afford them, and you may want to consider changing them as well. The issue around salary and wage adjustments. Many individuals had a reduction in salary. Now the question becomes one of, will that salary reduction continue indefinitely? Will it increase gradually? Under what terms will it increase? And that is another decision that is going to have to be made. I've talked about vacations before. This may be another opportunity to actually take a look at your vacation policy and convert it into the percentage calculation as opposed to salary with pay, or vacations with pay. And it would be essentially another opportunity for cost saving and risk mitigation. So the issue around technology, I only bring that up because with the downtime that's available, perhaps it's appropriate to take a look at some labor saving technology that as you start up, that you may find that you don't have to bring back some administrative support. And so it may be a human resource management system. You may have a work order management system as well that you've contemplated that you haven't put into effect. But each one of these should be efficiency driving and labor saving. And of course, the union. Again, where you are unionized. I would strongly encourage that you sit down with them, make sure that there's a clear understanding as to how the return to work is going to operate, that you're conforming to the terms of the collective agreement. Oftentimes we don't reference it enough. This is a time when you absolutely want to reference it very clearly. And more often than not, it's in the seniority provision of the collective agreement. So you need not go much further than that in order to assess what your obligations are as it relates to full-time, part-time, casual as well. And through this process, it may in fact create some opportunities for you to take a look at language associated with the downturn in the economy. And you may discover that where you had very narrow scope of work with a lot of classifications, that it's much more appropriate to have more combinations in order to, again, obtain some efficiencies. And that may become a part of your mandate as you go forward with your next round of collective bargaining. I'm also suggesting that you take a look at your KPIs. You know, we're accustomed to having the metrics: employee satisfaction, guest satisfaction, gross operating profit, RevPAR, net operating income. But try these as well as another consideration. And it might also help you to gauge how you are going to be growing your business from an payroll expense side. So sales per full-time equivalent. You know, we need not be reminded too much that full-time equivalent is really an accounting term to create a common denominator for anybody and everybody, but it's very impersonal. You may want to consider sales per payroll dollar, which includes the cost of benefits and sick leave. Or in fact, you may want to consider sales per employee. And I want to throw this in because there's oftentimes this belief that, you know, we're much better off having a lot of part-time employees. And I'm going to argue that that may not necessarily be the case. If you can produce full-time jobs, it's probably in your interest because that's fewer employees that you will have to engage. So the more part-time employees you have, you'll probably discover that reliability might be somewhat questionable at times. And you cannot lose sight of the fact that each one of those employees has expectations from you and becomes another potential rights dispute. And in closing, we have been accustomed in the hotel industry to take a look at 3 columns when we look at a P&L. Last year, actual, budget. Last year is really not going to be particularly relevant anymore, given what we have just encountered in March of this year. And what's going to be probably much more critical is not even a budget, Even the federal government is going to have difficulty coming up with a budget. What is going to be really critical is forecasting capability. And that is where the thought process has to really be applied. So cast aside the notion of comparing to last year. It's not going to be helping you as you map out what has to be done this year and subsequently into next year. And on that note, I leave you with Peter Drucker. If you want something new, you have to stop doing something old.